responsibility.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the Lore Council. This time it is Cade here, along with Keith.
Howdy, y'all.
And today we are going over 1984's Return of Godzilla, directed by Koji Hashimoto.
Otherwise known as Godzilla 2 Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah, if you want to skip over all the, weird stuff where Godzilla's, basically a superhero beating up other kaiju, yeah, this is basically where you want to go. It doesn't have any goofy, kaiju fights, no Godzilla doing, dances or anything, no Godzilla versus anybody, it's Godzilla versus Tokyo, so... A bit more of a serious outing. If you're familiar with Godzilla at all, throughout the 60s and 70s, Godzilla kind of got turned into, like I had mentioned earlier, a superhero where he's fighting against other kaiju, basically to protect Japan versus kind of, obviously, we've done a review and a watch-along of the original, so go watch that if you haven't, where he was originally, the destroyer of Japan, he's nuclear weapons come again, and all that dark, dour stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. After seeing Return of Godzilla, I would have liked either, some dark, dour stuff, or just go, pick the other street and go with the, goofy kaiju fight, or have Godzilla bust some dance moves or something.
Yeah, maybe it would have helped.
Yeah, because the movie's definitely lacking something. It needed something in it. Something extra.
Yeah, I definitely think it could have used those scenes from, the 1984 where you actually get the fallout of Godzilla's attack.
Yeah, some real nuclear horror stuff.
Yeah, because in this one, obviously... Alright, so we better give our spoiler-free thoughts before we get into anything. So spoiler-free thoughts, I guess, what are your thoughts on this flick?
It's Godzilla you can show your kids? That's without having them cry. It's fun. It's bright. It's watchable. It's enjoyable sometimes. I guess a little detail I liked was that every all the countries spoke their own language. Like you get Americans speaking English, get Russians speaking Russian. So that was cool. That was immersive when those scenes were going on, I guess.
Well, it would be more immersive if the American actor wasn't speaking in painfully bad English.
I'm pretty sure it was better than the Godzilla vs. Biollante English speakers.
Yeah, but in a vacuum, it's still not good. You can definitely tell he's reading from a script.
Yeah. I didn't think it was bad. It wasn't bad though.
Oh yeah, it definitely, as far as Godzilla, Japanese Godzilla films with people speaking English, it's definitely near the top. And it definitely gets, definitely, the English speaking definitely gets a little bit worse, so. But yeah, I guess my spoiler-free thoughts, it's definitely a fun movie to watch, but it doesn't have the impact of the original 1954 Godzilla.
Yeah, I'd say it has about, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But, so it starts off... And unfortunately, it starts off very promising. There's a fishing vessel kind of akin to the original 1954 that gets basically taken out by Godzilla, but then unfortunately they add in the sea lice, which is kind of it could have been an interesting part of the story if they would have continued with it, but after the first like 10 minutes, they're basically like a non sequitur. They're not important at all.
Yeah, they fight one sea louse.
Yeah, sea louse.
Singular term.
Yeah, louse would be the singular term of lice. So.
Yeah, they fight one sea louse and then that's the end of it. Which that's fine. It didn't look terrible. Okay, well, it looked all right, I guess, for like 1984 special effects.
Yeah.
When they had the scene with like the boat and like the volcano was like exploding in front of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was getting like they should have had like the Iron Giant standing out there in the middle there, and then like one of the guys like, "Wait, the lighthouse! I see it!" And he just like drives right into it.
Yeah, it's definitely. It's also very interesting that like this abandoned ship, they send a reporter out to, not like the military.
Well, I think he just went like of his own volition, right?
I guess, yeah.
Like, wasn't he like on his own boat or something?
Yeah, you're right, because they have like kind of the 1980s.
I watched this like 2 weeks ago, and you watched it last night.
I watched it last night. Yeah, well, they have the reporter. Yeah, he ends up finding it. Finds the boat deserted. Yeah. Well, I guess it's kind of like the movie opens with like this really dark scene of like the ship getting wrecked, and then they cut right away to like the daylight. It's in color, and they're kind of playing like the equivalent of like an American like pop song, and then he stumbles upon like this dark, dour, kind of like derelict ship.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny I said that this was like a Godzilla movie you could show your kid, because I forgot. When he gets on the boat and he opens the door, you get this freaking, this eyeless, like, decaying corpse, like, right in front of him.
Yeah, completely, like, sucked of his life.
Yeah, and when I saw it, I was, like, kind of wondering, like, what the hell happened here? It looks like they've been dead for a while, but, I mean...
Nope, sea lice.
Happened. They got, like... They done got edited up. But yeah, so that was kind of neat, I guess. It's kind of horror movie, I guess. But then the rest of the movie doesn't do anything like that. That's like the one little part of the movie that's kind of horrific. Yeah,
that's kind of why I mentioned, like, if they would have, like, kind of, like, kept going with the, like, sea lice and stuff, it could have been interesting, like, an interesting little bit, but they literally drop it in, like, the first 15 minutes of the movie, because... once you get back to Tokyo, the lone sailor who survives, he realizes that the creature he saw earlier was another Godzilla, which obviously had been kind of set up in the original 1954, that like as long as nuclear testing and stuff is going along, more Godzilla will show up. But they kind of drop it because they also realize that it's not nuclear weapons testing. It's not anything to do with mankind's use of nuclear weapons, nuclear energy, or anything. It's just like volcanic eruptions are wake up this new Godzilla. Is kind of what they do.
So it doesn't just take a nuke to wake up Godzilla. It could be any sort of cataclysmic force.
Yeah, which is kind of antithetical to the original Godzilla, because the scientist from the original says basically, like, as long as mankind is being a dick to the planet, more Godzilla are going to show up and punish us for like our transgressions. And then this one, it's random, like, volcanoes are waking up Godzilla.
Yeah, maybe it's the wrath of Mother Nature.
You could kind of get into that. I mean, with some stuff that Godzilla does later in the movie, you could definitely argue that, like,
doesn't he blow up like a power plant or something?
Yeah, with the whole submarine plot and then the power plant and stuff. But until then, we basically, I kind of like the scenes that we get with like the Japanese prime minister, where he's deciding to like keep these new sightings of Godzilla like under wraps and stuff. Like, if we let everyone know, it's gonna mess with the stock market and everything. And like he's like they're at least thinking of like, oh, like if this happens, it's gonna affect like the greater world, not just Japan, because in the original 1954, it was a bit more of like, oh, it's just attacking Japan. Yeah. And it's kind of more in isolation, versus this one, it's like, well, it's attacking Japan, which is going to also affect the global like stock market and stuff.
Yeah, if you didn't know that this was like a sequel to the original Godzilla, you would probably just get the feeling just from the way the Japanese Prime Minister and like all the higher ups kind of act like like they've encountered Godzilla before.
Yeah, definitely. Like, and they definitely, and even I think they also have like photographs and stuff, and which I think just end up being like screen grabs from the original Godzilla, which I really like because it shows the original Godzilla suit. It shows the original Godzilla attacking Tokyo and everything. So I think that was really cool to show.
Some continuity there.
Like, yeah, definitely establishing that this is a direct sequel to the 1954 Godzilla.
Yeah. It's too bad it's not better.
Yeah, and we'll definitely get to that because yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, just with like the little part of like the movie where like the sea lice are,
Yep.
It just kind of like I could just see like a whole movie kind of revolving around like like Godzilla leaving, horrific stuff like that in his wake, like sea lice and other kinds of stuff, and like him changing the environment,
Yeah, and that's definitely a thing.
And the horror of having and almost like a Godzilla kind of horror survival movie,
Yeah, because to skip like way later in the timeline of Godzilla movies, you kind of get that with like, well, first of all, you get that with the original 1954 because they talk about, Godzilla's left a trail of radiation in his wake. And then that kind of and that kind of stuff kind of translates later on to like 2016 Shin Godzilla, where, Tokyo is going to be uninhabitable because of Shin Godzilla's radiation that he leaves behind.
Yeah.
Versus this one where it's like, oh, we got to do what we got to do. Obviously, we'll get into it to stop Godzilla.
Yeah, and it doesn't, like, I don't know. It doesn't seem like Godzilla's doing that much damage. Well, like, besides, like, the stuff that he attacks, but, like, like, environmental damage. Even in the sequel, I don't think it's really brought up.
Yeah, because, and definitely, like, in this one, it's more Godzilla's destroying buildings versus he's harming the environment.
Yeah, and, like, people.
And people, yeah, which, obviously...
And him doing that and just existing and walking around is kind of just more like the catalyst for like the story with the Japanese government and like other governments and all that.
Yeah, definitely, because from here we kind of get on going along to we get a reporter. And his whole kind of thing is like hanging out with the sister of the sailor who survived and identifies Godzilla. And we get him like kind of meeting with like a science.
Doesn't he say like Gojira, right?
Yeah, well, because obviously like, and it's another thing like in Japan they call Godzilla Gojira. Which I think just actually, I don't know, I probably mentioned this in like the original 1954 review, but I think it just ends up like, when you take Gojira, it ends up being like gorilla whale, which I guess kind of makes sense as far as like the design and everything of Godzilla, but yeah, because the whole thing with like the scientist that the reporter meets up with, like he lost his parents in the original Godzilla attack, which again, it kind of like establishes this continuity with the 1954 film in where Godzilla rampaged through Tokyo. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I thought the scene where he was, saying, Gojira was kind of like the scene in 98 Godzilla, like the fisherman. It's like Gojira.
Yeah, because the whole thing with like, well, I guess just as like a Godzilla fun fact, like one of the whole instances that inspired Godzilla was there was this. It started with a fishing ship called the Lucky Dragon, which happened to just go into an area that the United States was testing nuclear weapons with, and then all of the people on board like suffered the effects of that. So it's kind of cool that they had like the whole. Wow. Yeah, that's like one of the big. It's the Lucky Dragon #5, I believe. If you look into it, it's like a real incident. Like a Japanese fishing vessel went into the Bikini Atoll where they were testing. The United States was testing nuclear weapons, and since that was all under wraps, this fishing ship didn't know that, and they sailed into it, and all the people on board, like they had to suffer through like radiation sickness.
Oof.
Yeah, it's
that's awful.
Yeah, it's literally like the worst thing you could get on the planet. But so it's kind of cool that like the ship from the beginning is a fishing vessel, which is kind of like a neat little tie back to the incident that spawned Godzilla, I guess.
And even in '54 Godzilla, they had like the first things that spotted him were fishing boats.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. So it's a nice little tie back. But yeah, so then from there we kind of go to So
'98 Godzilla was just ripping off its own franchise, I guess.
Yeah, it's not so much ripping off as to sort of. Yeah, it's more of kind of like a history repeats itself kind of thing.
Yeah, but
you could kind of go.
It's not a very original callback, but I guess it's fine. They didn't break the chain.
Yeah, definitely. And then obviously speaking of breaking the chain, we go from fishing boat to Soviet nuclear submarine in the Pacific, and I really liked this scene because it really builds up the suspense. And like 1954, I think this movie really builds up to the full appearance of Godzilla. Because with the whole fishing boat, you really only see kind of like his silhouette and then like the sea lice and stuff. And then
but I feel like the final reveal of Godzilla is a bit of a wet part, you know?
Yeah, definitely. But
but I like the Russian submarine stuff because one thing immediately, because I was watching the subtitle version in Japanese.
Yep, as I was.
It wasn't much of a switch when they were switched to Russian and there were subtitles. Like, oh, they're actually speaking Russian. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, that was a really cool thing they did because, like, obviously, like, you know, going from like Japanese to Russian is like a huge like linguistic difference. Yeah. So it's really cool that you get this difference between like these POV characters because like these Russians on the submarine are speaking actual Russian, and it's very easily identifiable because it sounds like Russian.
Yeah.
And they obviously must have gotten like actual Russian speakers for this because it sounds like their native language.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they would get a bunch of Japanese guys and dress them up as Russians and have them speak Japanese.
Yeah,
or pretending to be Russian.
Yeah, and it works really well because I like the whole suspense buildup of like the Soviet submarine scene where they're like, you know, oh, it's 100 meters out, and then all of a sudden it's right above them. And they talk about how like it's
good submarine action.
It's just floating there, and it's just hovering above them. And then all of a sudden, like everything's going wrong, and then this sub is just destroyed. And again, like the 1954, I think it works to its benefit that all of these things that you see on screen, they're all practical effects.
Yeah, I liked the because doesn't the whole submarine like start flooding?
Yeah, it starts flooding. Yep.
Yeah, it was about as good submarine flooding scene I've seen in a movie, so it was up to par. I liked it. And then I think you see like the sub just starts just totally just plummeting to the depths.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes
pretty hardcore.
Yeah, because even then, like, and you kind of get it because it's the only thing that's written in like I guess recognizable to like an English speaking language's like knowledge is like the submarine decides to dive down deeper in order to avoid the threat, and you see it go from like 400 meters to like 403 and just like drop down and then gone. And like obviously, you know, when you're 400 meters below the sea level, you know, you're gonna find some, you know, messed up stuff. And just even being down that low in regards to the sea in general, like it's already like, nerve-wracking enough because, we're all, obviously the audience is so used to being like at sea level, being above sea, and then you have these poor sailors who are, beset by a Godzilla, 400 meters below the sea level.
Yeah, I like submarine movies or things with submarines because you get that submarine horror. There's always like a flooding scene, and you're just like, "Oof, I would not want to work in a submarine."
Yeah, and I think
anything goes wrong, you're getting sealed inside a freaking room and drowned.
Yeah, and I think that works really well, and kind of, I think this is the first time we've mentioned it, but watching this, I tried to put myself kind of in the position of like someone watching this in 1984, because obviously with the 1984, you've got the Cold Wars going on, and like, in America, we had this tendency to view like, Russians and like, kind of just like the East in general is like, there are enemies, but you see these people and they're speaking a different language and everything, and you feel for them. Like, it worked really well. Like, you're not seeing them as like, evil Ruskies. You're seeing them as like these poor people who can't do anything about their situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, who's gonna care? I mean, who's gonna not care about people getting, sunk in a sub?
Yeah,
pretty grim stuff.
Yeah, well, I think just in general, it's one of those things that works well. Like, if you need to humanize, like, I guess in air quotes, the other, just show them drowning, because that's such a universally horrifying experience. I think it works really well. But yeah, from there we get. Obviously, the Russians, they think that the attack was by the Americans, and then we get this kind of like...
and then the Japanese are like, oh crap, we gotta tell them.
Yeah, because then we get because then we get this kind of point where it's like, the Russians are like, it was the Americans, because obviously, with the Cold War tensions and everything, it kind of dates itself. Well, hold on, guys. There's a giant nuclear lizard. It wasn't the Americans. It was the giant lizard. Don't worry, guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they reveal that Godzilla was behind, like, attacking the nuclear sub. And
I wonder if Tokyo, or I guess Japan, managed to keep the original Godzilla incident under wraps too.
I kind of think it would. Like, and you don't really get any of that, but kind of because of like the
fact that they have to reveal it's Godzilla, like, or maybe the other governments already knew or were informed a long time ago or something.
Well, I don't think they would have known, because the original Godzilla, it's on a lot smaller scale, where it only attacks the Japanese fishing boat and then Tokyo, versus this Godzilla kind of sets itself definitely more in the Cold War, where it's like it attacks a Soviet missile ship or a missile submarine, and then the Russians automatically assume it's the Americans.
Yeah.
So yeah, you definitely kind of get the feeling that, like, the original Godzilla, it's kind of like a, hush-hush thing within Japan. Versus this one immediately escalates itself, and that's one of the things I like about this movie, is the scale. That it kind of pushes itself beyond Japan, and it gets the world involved. Like the big two superpowers from the Cold War. I think it does it really well.
Yeah, sure, and I think that stuff, the stuff with the Russians and America and just the nuclear war stuff, like the 80s nuclear war stuff, I think it overstays its welcome a little bit and takes up a little too much of the story.
Yeah, I think if they would have cut like 10 minutes off it, I think it would have been perfect. Like, you kind of like set it as like, well, because obviously from here it escalates into like Godzilla actually attacks a nuclear power plant in it's somewhere in Japan. Obviously, I'm not super familiar with like, the layout of Japan or anything, but it attacks a nuclear power plant. Godzilla does. And because that's kind of where we get the whole... You could definitely say MacGuffin of how they're gonna defeat Godzilla, because it gets distracted by a flock of birds that are flying away. And then from there, the scientists are like, oh yeah, it's magnets, birds, flying away. We get it.
Yeah, I totally missed that part.
No, yeah, because Godzilla gets distracted by literally just by a flock of birds flying away because it's one of those things, like, how do birds migrate? How do they flock together? I don't know. Magnets, man. How do magnets work? I don't know.
Magnets, yo.
Exactly, and I think that's exactly it, It's kind of like, sticking itself in its time, like, And I think that's one of the fun things about watching these older Godzilla movies is, like, you can kind of put yourself in the time frame of those movies. Of, like, in the original ones, it's like, oh my god, nuclear weapons suck. We've been nuked once, and now this giant nuclear lizard is coming to, blow us up again. And in this one, you're kind of set in the time period of, like, Japan is stuck between kind of being the middleman between the Soviets and then the Americans, who both want to nuke Japan.
Yeah, I didn't feel like super immersed, but the story was believable, as far as Godzilla goes.
Yeah, as far as Godzilla...
Are we going to talk about Godzilla's first derpy close-up?
And yeah, I was definitely going to point that out, because when he first comes ashore, it's so good until you get to his face. Yeah. Like, because you kind of pan up, like, you get the thing from, like, the security officer or whatever, and he's on the ground level, and you get him juxtaposed between the scale of Godzilla, and they do a great job of building up the size and, like, the immensity of Godzilla. I would say even better than the 1954. But then you get to his face, and he looks so just, like, derpy. Like, and it's like, kind of like, just the design of Godzilla from this movie is so derpy. You can't help, like, and I don't know if you agree, but from the neck down, he looks great. But then from, like, the neck up, it's bad.
Yeah, it's the eyes for me. They just look too fake. They look like glass doll eyes a bit.
Yeah, and I think a big thing for me is the size of his head. It's too big in comparison to his body.
Yeah, and, like, the way his mouth is shaped with it is kind of weird. Like, he looks like a giant Godzilla toy almost with that head.
Yeah, and it's like,
that's the head of, like, what the Godzilla toy would look like the toy version of him.
Yeah, and it does not work because they do so many close-up shots, like so many shots where you get, like, the iconic, like, Godzilla roar, but it's this close-up of his face. Yeah. And it does not work. It's not menacing, it's not scary. Like,
it's funny.
It's derpy. Exactly. Yeah. Like, because in the original, you had so many good scenes where it's like Godzilla's roaring, but it's like a faraway shot, and all you see is, like, his mouth opening, and the design of it is so much better. And all I have to say is thank God they made his design better going forward. Because, like, it would not have worked. You wouldn't. I would say it's even hard to take Godzilla seriously in this movie.
Yeah. Because, like, medium to far away shots are fine.
Yeah, they look.
But up close, it's bad.
Yeah, because this first scene at, like, the power plant, they immediately go to his face, and we kind of go from there. And just staying with the plot, we kind of get that, like, some scientific scenes where, like, they discuss how Godzilla is, like, he has a homing signal from, and it's, like, akin to birds with, like, magnets and geology and stuff. And they kind of had this discussion after his first initial attack on land, where they could lure him into a volcano and then kind of have a controlled, like, volcanic destruction or eruption. And,
wasn't their plan to, like, lure him somewhere else first? Like, they lured him like a power plant or something.
Well, initially he's attracted to the nuclear
wall
power
of
plant,
like things that he goes, like a wall of, like, power generators or electric things or something.
Well, that kind of comes later. And that was also, I think, maybe from the first one, where they have him go through the big, like, power lines and stuff.
Oh, maybe I'm getting my movies.
Yeah, because they don't have any ideas for defense rather than cadmium shells, and their whole, like cadmium bullets, because their whole thing in this movie is like, well, we use cadmium bullets in nuclear reactors, so they gotta work on Godzilla.
Yeah, I kind of didn't get like what was happening until it happened. Godzilla falling asleep.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that was the plan? Okay, all right.
Yeah, because from there, obviously, we go to, we have this kind of, like, derpy introduction sequence to the new Godzilla design. And then we go into, like, the science of it, which I guess is kind of nice. Like, I like the science scenes because they're kind of akin to the original. Like, it's brains are going to defeat Godzilla, not brawn, which I kind of like.
Yeah, there's, shout out to Mike from, Red Letter Media, but his idea of the perfect Godzilla movie is, a bunch of scientists in a room arguing about how to stop Godzilla. Like, that's his idea of the perfect human side of the Godzilla story.
Yeah, and that's why, and that's a perfect way to say it, because that's one of my favorite things about, like, the solo Godzilla movies. Obviously, with the Godzilla versus movies, obviously it's going to be a little bit different, but I really like with the solo Godzilla movies where it's, I guess, more Godzilla versus Tokyo.
You get Godzilla versus the people of Japan.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, their whole thing is, like, we need to get the scientists together and figure out what to do versus... And I guess that's the perfect thing to bring up is after this, you get the whole big scene that takes up a lot of time where the Americans, the Soviets, and the Japanese are discussing what to do. And what's the first two big things that the two big superpowers of the world want to do? They want to drop their nuclear bombs. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, explode thingy.
Blow stuff up. Yeah, we'll just blow up this nuclear lizard with more nukes. What could go wrong?
We'll just nuke Japan again.
Again, yeah. And I think that still works well because obviously, this movie came out 30 years after the original Godzilla, which only came out 9 years after the atomic bombings at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it works really well because even then, in general, like, Japan is kind of, I would say Japan is kind of standing in for the rest of the world, where it's like, please don't drop nuclear bombs. They aren't good for anybody. It doesn't matter what you're doing, kind of thing. And, sorry, obviously we had a little bit of technical difficulties, which is just going to happen when you're, recording stuff on Discord. But I'd pointed out, Keith, that the last thing I was kind of saying is that, Japan, when you're having this kind of diplomatic meeting between the Soviets, America, and Japan, is kind of like Japan is almost a stand-in for the rest of, like, the world, where they're like, don't drop nukes on us. Nuclear weapons don't bring anything but radioactive fallout. Like, just don't do it. It's a bad idea.
Yeah, Japan be like, nuclear weapons, bad.
Yeah, and it's, in my opinion, it's especially effective because Japan is the only country that's ever had nuclear weapons dropped on it.
That's true. They are in the position to tell people that nuclear weapons are bad.
Yeah, and obviously, like, even, like, as people, as the audience, like, we can draw on, like, our knowledge of, like, the fallout of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where even if people survived the initial, like, explosion, they had to deal with radiation sickness, they had to deal with burns, they had to deal with their entire city being leveled.
Yeah.
And, now it's happening to their biggest city, Tokyo. And obviously, like, the two biggest superpowers in the world, they're coming together during the Cold War to agree to bomb Japan.
Yeah.
So it's a really, I know earlier you had mentioned that, you aren't the biggest fan of these political scenes, but I personally kind of like them because they kind of, like, set the stakes of, like, what's going to happen.
No, yeah, I think they're good at first, but like I said, they overstay their welcome.
Yeah, they do go on a little bit long, but I think overall they're really effective.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, but from here we get a Soviet ship, which is, imposter, sliding into Tokyo Harbor, is getting ready to, launch a nuke in case Godzilla attacks. So even though, we got those wascally Wussians, sliding in to blow up the world and initiate World War III.
Because it's Godzilla hunting season.
Exactly, and that's basically what it is. Because at dawn, which I think works really well, and I think the destruction scenes, just to preface this, they could have been way worse. Like, these destruction scenes, I think, are really, really good. But like the 1954 Godzilla, where the black and white kind of hid kind of the effects of the times behind the black and white, I think setting this attack at dawn works really well to kind of hide the effects of the time. And obviously the effects are multitudes better than 1954. I think they still look really good, even just kind of putting them in a vacuum. But just this kind of little first bit of Godzilla showing up, yeah, the design looks a little bit derpy, but what he does, I think, looks really, really good.
Yeah, I thought what they did with his tail, where like his tail kind of moves around, looked really good.
Mm-hmm.
Where it kind of like it's just kind of moving around while he moves around.
Yeah, I think that looks like really good because they didn't really do a lot with his tail in the original. It was a little bit more static versus this one. It's kind of like, it's moving around, kind of like a lizard, like obviously
or like
Godzilla.
A cat's tail.
Or like, yeah, exactly. Well, you got to put the cats in there somehow. When you're doing a podcast with me. You gotta drop the cat somewhere, but no, it works really well, and I think even the whole tail thing, it's something that they kind of carry on into the future of Godzilla, where his tail is.
Well, he's got the moving tail.
Yeah, because obviously, science lecture here, but because Godzilla is a bipedal creature, which is the way he stands, like. He's got to have like a tail to balance him out because of his size. So it works really well. They're kind of basing him off of
kangaroos.
Well, dinosaurs, because that was the original theory of how dinosaurs moved. Is they would keep their tail for balance because obviously Godzilla is based off of a T-Rex, and that's how people at the time thought a T-Rex would be able to move because they would have this tail to counteract their movements and like keep them moving and keep their balance. So it works really.
You got his lower half kind of does look reminiscent of a kangaroo. It's like lower half,
Yeah, because he's got the huge legs.
Yeah.
Yeah, he is a thick Godzilla.
I thought his goofy. Like his feet looked a little. Like I don't know. He just had these 3 big toes. They kind of comical.
Yeah, I definitely think...
They changed his feet in the next one. They made him look more like the classic Godzilla's feet.
Yeah, I would definitely say that this... And this is just me. It's just what Godzilla does in this movie is really cool. Like, the destruction scenes, really awesome. I would say, like, in the top, like, echelon of, like, the series... But then you have how he looks contrasting that, and it's like he looks. Yeah. It's such a derpy Godzilla's design, like.
Yeah, and they kind of just have him stand around a lot of the time, not doing things.
Yeah, and
it's kind of dumb.
And even in these destruction scenes and his fights with, and obviously we kind of skipped over like how the Japanese like government is like creating the Super X and everything. Like, even the destruction scenes with him, like. When he's not smashing buildings, you're right. He's kind of standing around. And I think that's kind of to... it's one of those things where they have to kind of hide how kind of dumpy and derpy he looks in this movie. Because I would say, and I think you would probably agree with me, from this movie to Biollante, night and day difference with the Godzilla design, with how he moves... how he looks and everything.
It's just so much better. So much better.
Yeah, like, because I think Godzilla vs. Biollante is 1988. I could be wrong. So even just like
89, I believe.
89. So yeah, even a 5-year difference between Godzilla suits, night and day. Like, this Godzilla is really derpy. And obviously from here, I would say they kind of use him as like a jumping off point to like make Godzilla like cool, like good looking. The destruction scenes only get better. But even then, the actual destruction, like the close-ups of the buildings getting destroyed, those look really, really good.
Yeah, all the practical effects, the miniatures look good.
Yeah, and I would say, like, my favorite scene of destruction happens right in the beginning, where there's all these cars, like, piled up on, like, the interstate, or freeway, or whatever, whichever term is more useful. I grew up calling it an interstate, but, you know, there's all these cars, and they're piled up. It's like a bumper-to-bumper backup, which, you know, everyone's been in. And they have this cool scene where Godzilla shoots his atomic breath, and from there it's like a domino effect, and it's like, you know, explosion, 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 explosion. That's just, for me, that's the highlight of this movie. That is that interstate scene.
Yeah, the atomic breath is good, you know. But it has to come out of the the 84 Godzilla's mouth.
And I would say that, like, one thing I personally, and you know, you're entitled to your own opinion on the Godzilla.
It's like someone who kisses with their eyes open.
Oh God, please no. But no, you're kind of right, because whenever Godzilla shoots his, you know, atomic breath, you have this derpy close up of this wide-eyed Godzilla. So that is a pretty apt description, but even the atomic breath I don't think is done very well in this movie, because it's such quick cuts. And it doesn't emphasize it. Like in the original 1954, they had this awesome thing where, like, his dorsal plates would light up, and then it was like a prolonged thing. Like in the 1954,
you don't have his dorsal plates light up?
They don't in this movie.
Really?
No, I don't think so, unless it's like really, really quick. But I think one of the biggest mistakes they do in this movie, and obviously, you know, at the time, I would never say I could do any better. With hindsight, I could, but at the time, I probably couldn't. They don't have any lingering shots of him using his atomic breath. It's like a really quick cut, and then you get like this blue beam. Versus the original from 1954, you have these kind of lingering shots where he's sitting there and he's shooting his atomic breath, and it's like a lingering close-up of him. And then you get a shot of his breath, which obviously in the original, it's in black and white. There's no color or anything. But then you go to this...
I didn't think there was anything bad about the directing of the atomic breath. Just it would be the suit. And the only parts I thought where the directing was, you know, bad.
Yeah, I would definitely say that... the directing,
the music didn't stand out too much to me. I don't remember hearing the classic Godzilla theme at any point.
No, I don't think you do at all. Like this theme, I think it's completely it's just all newly composed.
Like the standout theme for me would be like the Super X theme. That was pretty fun.
Yeah, the Super X theme is good, and it's like interesting that they did that they just had the Super X, because, it's this thing, and I guess we could get into it now, that, like, can actually, like, fight against Godzilla, because with its cadmium bullets, it knocks it out.
And is it shielded from radiation, or...
It can reflect his atomic breath back at him.
Oh, right.
Is what it is. But, I guess to just backtrack a little bit, we have the scene where when Godzilla emerges from Tokyo Bay, which should be a super cool scene, but since he looks so dumpy, isn't quite effective as the original.
It's too bad somebody couldn't, like, George Lucas this and, like, you know, fix do the special edition of Godzilla 1984 and, like, fix Godzilla in post or something.
Yeah, literally, it would be so much more effective if they took Godzilla from this movie and just switched the design to the 1989 design. Like, that would, for me, it would fix a lot of this movie.
Yeah, it would just make everything more effective.
Yeah, because, you know, you shouldn't be like, oh my god, that's Godzilla. You should be like, oh my god, that's Godzilla. You shouldn't be having that reaction to when you see, you know, this giant nuclear lizard. And I guess, you know, a small thing to also reference before we get into the whole nuclear freighter kind of thing is Godzilla in this movie is bigger than his original counterpart. In this movie, he is...
I didn't notice.
Well, I think it's just because, you're not used to, I guess, seeing it or whatever. But in the original... Well, in this one, he is... He's 80 meters tall. And in the original, he was 50 meters tall. And basically, they just kind of... Oh, here's my fun Godzilla fact for this review. In 1984, they scaled him up to be 80 meters tall because obviously, since 1954, just skyscrapers and buildings have just gotten bigger. So they kind of just did that to increase the scale and scale him up to at the time modern buildings. So no, he's bigger and everything. But just that fun little fact aside, there's my big fun fact for the Godzilla film. We have Godzilla when he emerges in Tokyo Bay, I guess to kind of get back on the plot. He basically, beats the shit out of a Russian nuclear sub, and the nuke starts going off. The countdown starts going off, and we have this tiny, tiny little side plot of the captain of the Soviet ship is trying to stop the countdown because he's oh my god, this is gonna cause nuclear war. Because it's a total accident that this Russian nuke is gonna get launched in the first place.
Yeah, I guess I thought the dude had a plan to set off the nuke or something.
No, due to Cold War tensions of the time, there's actually a American cut of this movie, and it's called Godzilla 1985. And in that movie, it's produced by Americans, it's a recut by the Americans, and so of course in 1985, Cold War's still going on, they actually have the Russians purposefully launch the missile.
Oh.
And then in this movie, it's an accident. It's just because... and it's one of those things where, Godzilla kind of, gets into it, with the nuclear freighter and stuff and launches the missile. And then from there, that kind of gets out of control. But it ends up being, and to skip ahead in the plot, it ends up being completely just unimportant because the Russian nuke launches and everyone's like, oh my god! But then the Americans just blow it up while it's in space, and it's not important.
Yeah, and then before that, Godzilla had been put to sleep by the Super X.
Yep, because they have cadmium missiles and stuff. So yeah, they end up knocking Godzilla unconscious, and then the man's hubris, the EMP from the nuke detonating ends up waking up Godzilla. He goes on a bit of a rampage, and then he knocks over a skyscraper onto the Super X, which, takes it out. And then, basically from there...
They do the whole, gentlemen, it's been an honor serving with you.
Yeah, pretty much. And then from there, they're like, okay, the scientists are like, okay, let's activate this homing device. And we'll lure Godzilla into the volcano. I don't know why they didn't do that earlier. If it was just it wasn't ready, I don't remember.
They were I feel like they just were trying out different plans throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Whenever one would mess up, they would move on to the next thing.
Yeah, which
I generally like the planning and stuff like that throughout the movie. And I did like the idea of the whole let's lure Godzilla into a volcano to stop him and stuff, because at least it's a thinking idea. It's using the environment and what they have. It's not just, oh, here's the Godzilla destroying serum.
Let's shoot it. Yeah, and again, I think that's a good point you bring up, because in the original Godzilla, brains beats Godzilla. Bronze doesn't.
Yeah, that's true.
So it works really well because, obviously, and again, you can relate this back to World War II history. Japan stopped using their brawn and used their brains and surrendered. Obviously, it was after a catastrophic loss of life because of the nukes and everything, and the the Russians declaring war and everything on Japan, but like brains finally hold out, and you can kind of relate it to this movie. Brains finally triumphs over brawn, where Godzilla and the military are these two big, brawny forces going at each other, and then finally it's the scientists and it's the smart people who stop the threat of Godzilla, which is an allegory for nuclear weapons. Like, they stop it because they end up using magnets and that kind of stuff to lure Godzilla into a volcano, and then they create a... And it probably sounds like, if you're watching this review, it sounds like it comes out of nowhere, because it does. Like, they kind of just, at the end, after Godzilla defeats the Super X, they're like, okay, well, let's use the homing device now. And we'll use a controlled eruption to trap Godzilla in the volcano.
Yeah, which at least ties into the beginning of the movie with the volcano from there, I guess.
Yeah, and it works.
But once it does happen, and then Godzilla's like in the thing, it just kind of feels, it's just like, it's like,
Yeah, well, and that's one thing.
It feels very anticlimactic.
I had mentioned, it's definitely anticlimactic, and I had mentioned earlier that, in America, you had this cut of Godzilla. Well, in this version of Godzilla, you have this speech by Raymond Burr, who was a big actor, like in the 50s and 60s and stuff. He gives this kind of speech, and he almost humanizes Godzilla as Godzilla is descending into the volcano, which in the Japanese version, I think it's kind of a goofy scene.
What are you talking about? In 1954 or
in 1985? In Godzilla 1985, the American cut of Godzilla. They have this inserted character. I think his name is.
They insert a whole character.
Yeah, and they did that in actually the American cut of the original Godzilla as well. And they have him where he gives this big speech at the end where he's talking about how, Godzilla, at the end of the day, he's mankind's creation, blah, 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 as he's descending in. And I think it works a lot better than the Japanese version, because in the Japanese version, which we both watched, you have him, like, falling into this volcano in goofy slow motion with a score that isn't that great.
Yeah, like the last shot of the film, I think, is just like the volcano, and then it cuts to credits or something.
Yeah, and basically, like, cutting to credits, that's the movie. So overall, I would guess, after this kind of like hour or so of talking about the movie and the plot and all these developments and everything that happen in it, I guess what would be your big, thoughts on the Return of Godzilla?
Better luck next time.
Yeah, I would agree. They improved on it in 1989, which will... Spoiler alert, we'll get to. But yeah, overall, I think this movie is okay. I would give this movie...
It's serviceable.
Yeah, I would give this movie, like... And again, as a Godzilla movie, I would give this movie, like... 6.5 out of 10. It's slightly above average just because it's got good destruction scenes. Godzilla's not a good guy. Godzilla's just... He's kind of following along with the original, Godzilla being a stand-in for nuclear weapons and stuff. Godzilla being a stand-in for the time, the fears of the time and stuff. I think that works good, with Godzilla kind of being put into the Cold War. But then the design of Godzilla, I think, brings him down so much that it's almost hard to take him seriously.
Yeah, that plus just kind of the rest of the movie feels a little hollow, like it doesn't have that much heart to it, Maybe just because none of the characters really stand out or are given that much focus, but just, something about it is just like I just felt a little bit disconnected from the story.
Yeah, and I think it goes on a little bit too long. Like you had mentioned, if they cut off, a little bit off of the time of like the diplomats, and if you cut out some other times like here and there, I think the movie would have flowed a lot better, but it's just...
Maybe just a more interesting story that just doesn't seem like random and like haphazard in the way it progresses, because Godzilla gets like put to sleep, and then like the nuclear thing happens, and then like they stop it, but then the EMP wakes up Godzilla, and then the Godzilla's in a volcano, and then it's like that's it. That's all you get.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't work super well, but I would say overall, as far as this movie goes, like you had mentioned, it's serviceable. It serves as a movie to like the sequel of Godzilla. It serves.
Yeah, like 6 out of 10. It sets up the next one, pretty well, I guess.
Yeah, so perfect, I guess. And I guess kind of with that, this is, serviceable. If you enjoyed this movie review or anything that we've put out, drop this video a like. And, subscribe to the Lore Council. We're trying to grow the podcast. So, it helps us every little bit along the way. And we have definitely more and I would say better Godzilla content coming out in the future. So with that, this is Cade from the Lore Council signing off.
This is Keith. Hopefully this podcast was serviceable.
Probably more serviceable than the movie.
Oh. Maybe.
Maybe. All right, so we will see you next time on the Lore Council.